Good. Okay, so we're here today, obviously, to talk about recruiting and inducting new trustees into your organisation. We've already carried out our quick poll. So let me start with what we're going to talk about today. Please feel free to comment as we go along, ask questions. I can't actually see all of your faces at the moment, so just shout out or pop something in chat if you want me to pick up on anything. So please feel free to do that. So today's session, I think especially it's relevant at the moment as the pandemic has created many difficulties for communities and village halls, especially with the ever-changing, what we feel like the ever-changing rules and regulations that surround that environment. So, you know, as trustees, you've had to introduce a whole myriad of new rules and regulations to users of your halls, and I appreciate that many of you have reported back to me that this has added additional work and additional pressure to you. So what we're hearing from kind of the national network is there's this trustee burnout, and many committees are seeing trustees walking away from the situation and leaving committees in a position where they need to find new trustees to come forward and new volunteers to come forward. So this is a good time for us to look at the good governance of your community facilities and also how you can recruit new volunteers and trustees in light of this. When I started writing this presentation, it was very much focusing on recruitment of trustees and the induction of trustees, but the more I kind of went through the presentation, the more I kind of feel that actually there are two roles here. There's the trustee role, but there's also the important role for volunteers and engaging volunteers in your organisation. So people who don't necessarily, and we've already chatted about this briefly, about people don't really want to take on the commitment of being a trustee, but they're still really valuable to your organisation. Right, so let's make a start. So one thing that I would recommend that a committee does as a starting point, and many of you may have already done this or thought about this, but do a skills audit of your committee. It not only highlights and identifies where the gaps are, where you need to find people, but also you might be surprised by some of the hidden talent that you've already got on your committee. Quite often people don't like to blow their own trumpet, but you could find by doing a skills audit and talking through with people about
the dog.
What things they do have, what skills they do have. You might have talents sitting on your committee that that you never realised before. One of the things that I will issue from today is I've got a set of templates that we can provide after this session, and there is a skills audit in that, so a sort of starting point for you, one that you can kind of edit and amend that suits your personal, your committee circumstances. So you can take the skills audit further than just your trustees, and if you've got a bank of volunteers already, obviously carry out the same process with your volunteers. Again, you might be surprised, you might be harbouring just the person that you need and you need to nurture to come onto your board of trustees. The one thing I would do is I'm very keen on succession planning, and when I was a chairman of a committee, I always insisted on having succession planning as part of our monthly agenda, because it's about getting people to talk about where is the next generation going to come from. So I would always have an agenda item which said, succession planning, and insist that the committee talked about it, because you never know, you could find yourself in a position that somebody's taken ill unexpectedly, or, somebody has to leave the committee because of family commitments, and you've lost a huge part of your committee because that person has been removed. So the more that you can kind of get in the mindset of getting people to shadow other key people, trying to have that rolling process of looking for people and training people, really, I suppose, so that, you know, someone in your committee can shadow you as the booking secretary or shadow you as the treasurer, to make sure that if the worst scenario happens and you're removed from that committee, that someone can step in at very short notice to take over from you. Whatever you do, don't wait until you've only got 2 or 3 trustees left on your committee, because it is such a dangerous position for a committee to be in, and you know, and then it's really hard work in order to get yourself back to a position where you've got a healthy committee. So many you know, looking at trustees and serving on your committee, it's about looking much wider and engaging as many people in your committee, in your community that you can, really. I often hear feedback that I get from trustees is, oh, there's nobody who is prepared to help, or there's nobody who will be prepared to be a trustee and come on our committee. I think there are ways of doing that. I think people like to be asked to join things, and I think people like to be valued. So I think, you know, keeping an eye out and identifying people in your community and making that personal approach to people. On a personal experience, I've always found that a really useful and valuable way of getting people involved in an organisation, either as a volunteer or as you know, getting them involved as a trustee. So don't be frightened to, you know, actually approach people, directly target them, and bring them into your organisation. So let's have a little look at the types of volunteers that that you can get, and I'm sure you'll all be kind of familiar with these, but I think it's just kind of worth reflecting on how and why people might want to volunteer for your organisation, either you know, as a general volunteer or as a trustee. So long-term volunteers would be your trustees, or somebody who is prepared to do those regular jobs. At my village hall, when I was a chairman, we had a wonderful chap who he didn't want to be a trustee, but he gave so many hours of his time by you know, setting out the chairs, unlocking, locking up late at night. He, you know, he gave as much as any trustee gave to our organisation, but he just didn't want to do the committee side of things. He didn't want to sit around a table. He didn't like that debate and discussion element of it. He didn't like, you know, potentially arguments. He just wanted to give his time to the charity, and he gave his time in bucket loads. And I don't think that should, you know, ever be underestimated, that there are people who want to do those very, very practical jobs, but not be a trustee. Short-term volunteers, you know, they might be somebody that you can identify in your community who you can bring in for a one-off purpose. So you might have a fundraising project which is very short term. It's only going to be for a month or 2 months to raise money for a particular project, and then it's always worth asking that question. If somebody could give some time, be it 1 hour for an event, or, you know, several hours over a month time, if they know the time that they're committing their time for, they might be prepared to do it, because they can say, yeah, you know, this month I can afford to give you 10 hours of my time to achieve whatever that project is that you want to achieve. And that might be, you know, decorating the building, or, you know, doing something specific. Yesterday I visited Leverington Village Hall, and they've just carried out, over the lockdown period, they carried out a renovation of their desk decorating, and the trustees had loads of people who just volunteered their time to decorate the building. They all had different skills that they could offer, either through their, you know, their professional lives, or, you know, hobby interests. but we visited yesterday and they've done a fantastic job. And, you know, people being able to give just a few minutes, a few hours of their time has made such a huge difference to that charity overall. You can also get employer supported volunteers. So it's worth thinking about local businesses and local organisations that you've got in your area, or even thinking about some banks do it, where they will deploy their employees for a period of time. I was talking to a charity recently. It wasn't a village hall charity, admittedly, but I was talking to a charity recently where I think it was Barclays it was HSBC had provided a member of staff to give support to a charity over a period of 3 months. And, you know, their area of specialism was organising fundraising. And so, you know, they were able to give that to the charity over a period of 3 months. And you know, they had a significant impact for that short period of time. Another example I've got of that is in my local area, because I live just over the Suffolk border and just inside Suffolk. We've got the 2 American air bases close to us, and they will, the American Air Force will send a team of people out to help and support local community buildings, and our village hall has them to come out and do decorating, or they will clear the gardens, or any sort of practical support that they can offer. So it is worth thinking about organisations in your area, and could they help and support you with volunteers on a, you know, on a short-term basis. I've also listed here unemployed volunteers, because there's an opportunity that you know, somebody might be looking for work in your area. They've got some time to spare, but it's going to benefit them because it's something that they can add to their CV, that they've helped you and supported you in whatever way. You know, as I've listed here, you know, the things that people can gain by volunteering for an organisation. There's the work experience aspect, learning new skills, and obviously the friendship and you know, being part of a team. They're all really important to people, and especially at this time when you know there has been people suffering with, you know, lockdown, loneliness, and getting people back into the community. This might be a really good opportunity for them to give some time back to their community facility.
Lisa, on the same note, could I suggest that you talk to people like Time Bank, because obviously there's a quid pro quo in terms of they give time, but they also get something back for it.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. And Time Bank is a brilliant place for anybody, if it's set up in your local area, you know, make contact with them, because it's such an easy way to get volunteers through your door. And what might start off as an ad hoc, you know, one-off session could build, and they could end up being a trustee on your, you know, on your charity if they enjoy their experience. Really good point, thank you. So I thought this would just be an opportunity for us to have a discussion about why do people volunteer. So I'll just stop sharing for a second. So in your experience, why did you, or why did you know, people come forward to your committee? What sort of, why was your reason for becoming a trustee of your charity?
Well, my reason becoming a trustee was to give back to the village. The village, I've lived in the village now for 25 years, and most of that time I was running my own business and didn't have the time. Two years ago I retired, and I thought I need to do something, you know, proactive and worthwhile for the community. But I've found, since being the trustee of our village hall committee, the level of, you could say, apathy in our village. People just don't want to be involved. It's too much effort, and it's quite sort of sad, really. You know, they want everything that the village can offer, but are not prepared to actually help out everybody else. I'm actually, as Kevin mentioned, I'm a parish councillor as well, and I found that to be quite soul destroying in certain aspects, where people, if they don't get their own way, they get quite nasty. So yeah, we are fortunate. I could have said it is. I'm Mike from Guildham Malden. We've got there's 6 trustees in our village hall, which we're very fortunate, and we've got a good mix of ages. But we do have certain skills missing. But overall, we've tried and tried. We've got a local village magazine, advertised in that, and you can guarantee that you won't get a single response from an advert, and you can advertise week, month after month, and you don't get anything.
And I think sometimes the adverts in a magazine can be quite cold, and that's why I was referring to kind of like personal contacts with people. People do like to be asked to do things, and I think it's very easy to gloss over an advert that is in a magazine. Yeah, I've done it myself when I've seen seen adverts.
I mean, sorry, Lisa. What we've done also, we do have now that lockdown has come out, we have in face-to-face meetings, albeit with wearing masks in the village hall, and we invite everybody in the village to come in and join. You know, all the doors are open, the windows are open, it's nice and fresh air. And I can guarantee the last meeting we had, there was the 6 trustees and 1 person turned up out of a village of probably 1,500 people.
Yeah, and you know, we could probably all reflect on that when you have your AGM and you invite people along to your AGM. It is very difficult to engage people on a kind of a mass basis. Malcolm.
Yeah, I moved into the village in 2016. In 2017, as I said earlier, the village hall committee was standing down en bloc, and I decided that it would be nice to give back to the community, although I had previously had no interest in village halls whatsoever. I'd also seen ex-colleagues who had retired and become couch potatoes and died after a couple of years. And my partner and I had the discussion about this and decided that we needed to keep our grey cells and our bodies active. So I ended up as chairman of the village hall, but in addition, like several of our colleagues here today, I'm also sucked into being a parish councillor, and also being sucked into several committees at the nature reserve. We've now gone from the sublime to the ridiculous because we actually struggle to find times in our diary for our own activities.
There's something very true there about if you want something done, ask a busy person. And the thing that I see time and time again is that when somebody starts to volunteer, they'll end up inevitably with multiple roles, because people will see that they're a volunteer and they're like, oh, could you come and help on my committee? Or, oh, can you come and help on my committee? So before you know it, you've got a full, as you say, a full diary. We do tend to see the same faces coming round on either the parish council, the village hall, the other, the other community activities. So I think, Malcolm, it's a very common thing. Jan.
We have we're a CIO, and we should have 9 members on our committee. At the moment we've got 7. 3 of and each person represents one of the user groups. 3 of the trustees are sort of parish councillors, or they're sponsored by the parish council. In that sense, there are 3 places on our committee. But we try to reach out to our user groups. So, I mean, we're short of 2 people at the moment. So we're asking whether somebody who runs a play group would be interested in coming. We meet once every 2 months, so it's not quite such a commitment. So far, I got onto the committee because I was asked to join, and now I was just a committee member, and now I'm the secretary. But but we try to make it a personal approach to people, because we have the same problem. If you just put an advertisement in the local parish newsletter, some people read it, some people don't, and you don't really get much of a response. And the same with the AGM, really. But we are lucky in that we do have a sort of a core of unofficial volunteers who would come in and help if necessary, but they don't want to be trustees.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely essential to the running of a facility, isn't it? That you've got those willing volunteers who are there, and as my experience of being a village hall chairman is you know, the volunteers give so much of their time, but they may not like the committee aspect. So it really is important to have that kind of balance between trustees and volunteers. Helen, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm reading the name and.
I was asked by, I'm a member of the various groups in the village, and I was asked by their gardening committee to volunteer for the village hall committee. Personally, I wasn't really aware of you've made quite a strong difference between volunteering for the committee and being a trustee. Now, I'm just started along the line. I've been sitting in on the meetings on Zoom, and now, thankfully, face to face with the Linton Village Hall Committee. Thankfully, we've got a strong core there, but I do appreciate we need to have succession planning, because really that core could be decimated and we'd be left with nothing, just literally people like myself who have just joined since the middle of the year.
And there is a big difference between being a trustee and simply giving your time to the charity to help out. Being a trustee, you do have all of the legal responsibilities that sit with that. You must attend your trustee meetings. The volunteers don't get involved in trustee meetings and don't have that decision-making power. So there is a big difference between the two roles, but equally both roles are really valuable to a charity, I think.
Yeah.
Stan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just interesting listening to some of the discussion. We recently recruited a new trustee, and at the last meeting we had, we were discussing the ongoing problem of succession planning, etc. And he made an interesting point, which is to make being a trustee attractive, to make the village hall more attractive. It seems in a lot of the communities, they don't quite see it like that. They'll come to the events and they'll join the clubs, but it's not seen, for fear of shooting myself in the foot, they see it as a bunch of oldies running the local village hall. It's sad to say that, but I think that's the reality. And this is the problem with trying to get younger people involved. Yes, there's a time issue. They're at different stages in their life. But the new recruit, it was one of the first points he made. Try and make it, you know, if we're going to go out there and try and get people to volunteer, we don't have a problem with volunteers. It's getting commitment to trustees. And he said the strongest thing we can do is to make it more attractive, make it important that they join in something that has a relevance. And I'm not quite sure how we necessarily do that, but I think the marketing bit may well help that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stan. And as you're saying it, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, it's like, it's a really difficult role to make attractive, because you are bound by the law, charity law. You are, you have a set of responsibilities that you have to adhere to. So it's really difficult to make that exciting and interesting to somebody, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the new recruit happens to be the youngest member now.
Yeah.
And he made the point because I think he wondered as an outsider what it would be like inside.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Malcolm.
Yeah, picking up on that point, we actually set out to recognise with our committee meetings that we have a serious role, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. So we try and make our meetings fun.
Yeah.
And we've similarly just taken on a new trustee who came as the parish council representative a couple of months ago, decided he enjoyed our meetings so much that he'd like to come on the committee as an ordinary member, and now we've converted him to a trustee. So we try to make sure that our meetings are not like a parish council meeting.
That's a really good tip, actually, though, I think, Malcolm, isn't it?
Yes.
Sarah, I think, did you indicate first, or?
Actually, I'm in the middle of Germany, and there's a delivery behind me, which is very noisy. But I'll speak later if that's okay.
Okay,
It's
no
really
problem.
picking up on trustees and volunteers. But I'm going to mute.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Kevin.
Yeah, my background was in recruitment in the corporate and the academic world, and I think there's a lot of lessons from that can be brought into this, which is around, should we say, the branding of the role, the branding of the village halls, making it in that sort of terminology an employer of choice, if you like. So people want to join us, and there's a bit of energy and buzz around it. Rather than, I don't think many people actually know what the village halls really do, and I think we assume they do. But as you say, a lot of people just look at it and think, oh, it's something that's always been there, that this old committee looks after, and every now and again we go along to a concert, maybe at Christmas. So I think there's a big branding exercise needed about what is the village hall, what else it could be, not just what it is, but what else it could be in terms of the community hub or whatever else.
I think that's a really good point, and it is about consulting and engaging with your community continuously.
Yeah.
Which again comes back to the trustees, because it can all be hard work and very time consuming. So going back to the skills audit, it's really important to find those people on your committee who either have those skills, or to try and find people who you can draw in who've got those skills. Dorothy.
Can I just say that everything that everybody said is exactly the same as happens at our village hall. We've all got the same problems. I've lived in the village 34 years. I've been chairman of the parish council. I run the friendship club. I'm secretary of the allotment, and every one of them can't get anybody to join them. Can I just be excused for a minute, because I've got to make an urgent phone call, so don't zoom me out. I'll be back in a minute.
No, of course, Dorothy, that's not a problem. Shall I start doing the presentation again?
Okay.
That kind of seems like a useful break, doesn't it? So let's.
Yeah. But I just say one thing before you
go, Sarah.
I do agree. Oops.
No, it's fine. I'm just.
That's all right.
Presentation again.
That's all right. Okay, I do agree with everything that was said before, especially making the meetings more fun, enjoyable, a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, that sort of thing, and the importance of having volunteers. We call them friends of the village hall, and it's often these people that will go on to be trustees.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody see the presentation okay?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So having both for that discussion, these are some of the things that when I was putting this together, these are the things that I've kind of drawn on that I think that people would volunteer for your organisation for. So I won't read them out. They're all fairly straightforward, and I think hopefully you'll agree with those. Maybe not. If you disagree, shout, let me know. But I think they're kind of the obvious things why, reflecting on my own personal experience, why I volunteered for various organisations. Okay, so recruitment. It's really important to be clear, and I think we've kind of touched on this in our conversation, about being clear about the role that you want somebody to do. So we do have some templates that we can provide you, and I'll put those together in the pack to send out to you after this session. So around chairman, treasurer, secretary, And it's probably good for you to set out a volunteering policy as well, in terms of what some sort of protocols around around your volunteering roles. I think, especially when you're asking people to do the role of secretary and treasurer, what you don't want to do is you don't want people to feel overwhelmed by responsibility. So I think by setting out a very clear direction for them in the first place, that you can talk them through, and that the committee can have a full understanding of what those roles and responsibilities are and how those people undertake them, is a kind of a helpful starting point. I don't know if any of you have already got that in your induction pack, but it's worth considering and worth looking at if you're trying to you know, get people to take on new roles, especially that we've already mentioned about the difficulty in getting treasurers. So I've mentioned on this slide about subgroups and working groups, appreciating the conversation that that we're having today, but has been, obviously I've been getting feedback over a number of years now about the difficulty in getting people to join the full trustee committee. If you've got something like you're organising an event, or you're organising a fundraising exercise for a particular project, it might be worth recruiting people from the community to sit on a subgroup. And obviously the subgroup, you need to be really careful in terms of how you're setting it up. And I would recommend setting up a terms of reference for a subgroup, because responsibility and decisions clearly sit with the trustees of the charity, but a way of engaging and involving your community in the village hall and in something which is attached to the village hall. People might be prepared to sit on a subgroup where they're not prepared to commit to be a trustee of the charity at the moment. It reduces your workload and it engages more people. Out of the people that have been involved in that project, if they enjoy the experience, you might be able to translate that into future trustees coming through. So it's a way of involving people, and hopefully a bit of that succession planning and encouraging people to come through as trustees once they get a taster of what the charity is about and potentially what the charity can do. So my message really is thinking as widely as possible when recruiting to your organisation, thinking about the gaps in knowledge, the gaps in expertise, and recognising that there's always going to be capacity issues in terms of you know, your trustee board. The more people you can involve and engage, the lighter the workload for everybody. So I've used the bullet point here, the last one, about, you know, looking out for people who could maybe prepare newsletters, posters, manage a Facebook page. The trustees don't have to take all of that burden on themselves. If you've got somebody in the community who is particularly interested in social media or has a professional background in social media and they can offer you some time, you know, they might be the ideal person to recruit and say to them, look, oh, you know, could you manage the Facebook page for us, or are you prepared to write the newsletter for us? You know, it's about engaging people where it's appropriate, and them not having the full burden of being a trustee of the charity. So looking at these are, you know, very kind of ordinary methods of advertising. There is, as I said earlier, there's no magic to all of this in terms of getting people engaged and involved in your charity. But what I would recommend is actually using not just one of these in the list, but it's about having a toolbox and using as many of these opportunities as possible in order to, you know, as we've talked about, marketing your charity and getting people engaged in your charity. And if you can market your charity as something that, you know, people are interested in being involved in, they'll want to come to you and they'll want to find out more and be engaged more. And it might be that they attend, you know, I've said on there about holding an event, so it might be that they're attending an event, happen to talk to a trustee, and through that conversation you can engage them in you know, further volunteering opportunities. So it's always being on the lookout for somebody coming along. I've added to the bottom of the slide there. I don't know if you've got any ideas that you would add to that list, or any sort of tips that anybody can pass on that's worked well for you. No, everybody's very quiet.
I've lost the presentation. I can't see it now.
Oh, can't you, Dorothy?
No.
Is everybody else see the presentation okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know why that would be then, Dorothy.
Ah.
I think, Lisa, as you said, involving people in some aspect, and then one or two will come in to become trustees in due course. We've got, we're desperately short of volunteers, of trustees again, but over the last couple of years, we've had 3 new very good trustees coming from things like our cinema group. That we share the same problems as everybody else on gender. We're nearly all male. Age, we're nearly all elderly. And we're people.
It is difficult. There's no getting away from it. And as I said, that there's no magic solution to any of this. It's really understanding your community and looking at opportunities that you have coming along, and hopefully using some of the tips that you'll pick up from fellow trustees today, but also, you know, some of the tips that I've highlighted in the presentation.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of using all of them and trying everything, really. I don't underestimate. I've been in your position, and I don't underestimate how difficult it is to, you know, to get people engaged and committing to a charity. Would people be okay to have just a 5-minute break? You're very welcome. If you don't want to break and have a cup of coffee, you're very welcome to you know, stay here and have a chat for 5 minutes. But if I can rest my voice, that would be really good. So what we're going to look at next is trustee or volunteer induction. So hopefully you've all got something in place already.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Okay, right. So
No.
let's have a look and see what you should have in place. Now, we do have an information sheet called Your Village Hall Management Committee, and it tends to be the first document I would point a village hall committee to if they were kind of a brand new committee. I will send a copy of that round to all of you. And it's a really good document because it kind of sets out everything in really, you know, easy terms, step by step, of what a trustee would need to know in order to be part of a management committee. And part of that document, it does actually list what should be in an induction pack. And we can also supply the templates for you in order to set up that induction pack. So a trustee induction pack is probably heavier in detail than what you would want for your volunteers, but it's certainly something that you can develop your volunteer induction pack at the same time as doing a trustee one. So the key things that I would recommend that you have in any induction pack is the fact that you've got a task or role description for that that volunteer or that trustee. You know, in terms of a trustee, obviously you've got you would issue them with the Charity Commission document CC3, which clearly sets out the roles and responsibilities, legal responsibilities in terms of charity law for a trustee. It would obviously not need to be as heavy as that for a general volunteer, and you can just simply have an A4 page of whatever task they happen to have. It's a good idea, not necessary, but it's a good idea to maybe have an application form for volunteers so that you've got all of their key information in one place, which then obviously ties in with the volunteer records, making sure that you keep their information securely under GDPR regulations. But so you've got, you know, contact numbers, an emergency contact number, all of those types of things for your volunteers. Obviously, the trustees would have their declaration forms. There are two versions of that. ACRE issue a template document, or certainly my preference would be to use the Charity Commission downloadable document for trustees to sign to make sure that they fully understand the role in which they're undertaking. And that's essential that they do that after the AGM, or if they're co-opted after the committee meeting that they were co-opted.
Lisa, a quick question. What's your take on things like DBS checks?
DBS checks, it can be quite a complicated area. DBS is required, as my understanding, if you have direct contact with individuals, but you know, whether it's adults in terms of dealing with adults at risk, or children for children safeguarding purposes. Generally, trustees don't have direct contact with those types of individuals, so wouldn't need a DBS check.
But what about areas like finance, for example?
I've not come across a trustee needing a DBS check for managing finances, remembering that all trustees on a committee are equally responsible for the finances of a charity. So you might have a treasurer who is undertaking the specific role of treasurer, but all trustees on that committee are equally responsible for the finances. So there is no excuse for any trustee saying, oh, it was the treasurer's job, it's not mine. I'm unaware that that's happening. So that's where I'd certainly see it in terms of finance. Is that
sure? No, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to the icons on the screen, I would recommend having, if you haven't already got it in place, I would recommend having a policy in place to cover members' expenses, so trustees' expenses, and then obviously if you've got a bank of volunteers, you can extend that so it's trustees and volunteers' expenses. So you've got a very clear process that you would follow in terms of dealing with claims that you would have from either trustees or volunteers for expense costs. And lastly there, capture it all in one handbook or one induction pack. And if we look at the next slide that I've got for you, this is kind of the list of things that I would expect to see in an induction pack, certainly for trustees. As I say, for volunteers, you wouldn't need such a detailed pack, and you could develop that depending on the circumstances for your organisation. The first bullet there about an information sheet, it's really useful to have that information sheet as your lead document in an induction pack, because it really sets the history for a charity and gives the trustees a really good feeling for what the charity is about, and ties everything up into one document. So it would have key contact people in it. It would have a brief history, what the various documents are that the trustees should be looking at as key points of interest for them in their role. The second point on the list, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the first two for me are kind of key ones that are really important. the trustee and governing document and any lease documents, if you have them, really important that all trustees have. If they can't have a copy of them, at least they've read them and seen them. These days, the fact that we can scan them in and keep PDF copies, you know, it's really easy to make sure that you're passing those on to any new trustees. They have a responsibility to read those documents, understand those documents. You know, for every management committee I work with, your governing document is the document which sets out how your charity should be run. It sets out your objects so you know what you can and cannot do for your charity. And every trustee should be aware of the contents of that document. Can't stress that heavily enough, really.
Lisa, could I just ask,
Yeah.
we will, I presume, get a copy of your presentation, will we?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, you'll get a copy of the presentation and you'll get a copy of information sheets that are relevant to this. And also, I've got some templates that I want to share with you to either use or not use, but I've got some templates that might be of use to you and your committees.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So having looked at the induction pack and the types of things that you might want to include in either your trustee or your volunteer induction pack, it's really important once you've got your trustees and your volunteers to value them and to retain them. These are just some examples I've kind of put on here. Some of them are a bit cheesy, certificates and award evenings, but you know, it's about you thinking in your own circumstances, in your own community, how people would value, how you can show your trustees and volunteers that you value them and you value the input into your charity. So certainly acknowledging them at the AGM and other public meetings is really important. Maybe holding social events just for your volunteers so that they get the opportunity to, you know, to benefit from the building that they're giving time to as well. And it's really important to make sure that and you'll all know this because you're all volunteers, and you know, we all need to be appreciated for the time that we give. So you know, it is just helping to keep people engaged and involved in your charity. And we've talked this morning about having fun at meetings, and I think that is really important. And I kind of put that in bold on this slide. It's keep things interesting. If people get bored, if people get overwhelmed, they will drift off, they will go away. So you know, it might be hard work, but keeping those people interested in your charity is really, really important. And if you are unfortunate enough to lose trustees and volunteers, I think it's important to try and have a conversation with them. Sometimes, you know, it can be contentious and there isn't an opportunity to talk to people. You know, they up, resign and walk. But if you can get feedback from them about, you know, what went wrong, what could we improve to make other people's experience better, it's really important to get that feedback. And the last point I put on this slide is about during your induction process, make it really clear to, especially to volunteers, about, you know, who on the committee is responsible, who is their contact person, who can they go to talk to, that if they do have a problem, if they do feel uneasy, who can they speak to in order to put that right. And you might want to think, if you do have a large number of volunteers, you might want to think about putting a complaints process in place, so it's really clear to the trustees and the committee about how you will deal with something if something goes horribly wrong. And you know, you've got volunteers who are upset or you know, are aggrieved by maybe something that a trustee has said or done. So think ahead about, you know, what would we do if the worst case scenario happened. A few years ago, in one of my previous roles, I came across a chairman who said to me at an event, he said, oh, I don't know, you know, I can't seem to find trustees, I can't get volunteers, I can't get anybody to help at the village hall. You know, I'm really, really desperate. And we had this conversation about the situation. He then walked away from me, went up to one of his volunteers and proceeded to shout at the volunteer and belittle this volunteer in front of everybody who was at the event. And that situation has always stuck with me because of the way he clearly treated his volunteers. People were not going to come forward and they were not going to put themselves in that position to be shouted at and belittled in public. But he couldn't see what he was doing. And he just saw it as, well, I just can't get anybody to help. But he couldn't see that it was the way he was treating people is why he couldn't get volunteers. And it's just, you know, it's always stuck with me, the importance of valuing people and kind of trying to put yourself in their position. So very quickly, I just want to reflect on making charities decisions, because we've done a lot of talking this morning about volunteers and trustees, and volunteers are clearly very different to trustees, and trustees have the full responsibility, the legal responsibility for the charity. And what you don't want to do is find yourself in a position where those two roles of volunteer and trustee are kind of merging and conflicting in any way. So do check your governing document. Your governing document will clearly set out who, and more importantly, who cannot take decisions for the charity. Generally, the trustees, who are the management committee of the charity, are the only people who can take decisions for that charity. Most committees are made up of elected, representative and co-opted members. Again, I mean, I'm kind of setting this out as and in general, check your governing document, because not all committees are exactly the same. I came across one recently that just has elected members, no co-opted, no representative. So your governing document is always your starting point. But whatever the makeup of the committee, once you're on the management committee, whether you're elected, representative or co-opted, you all have equal rights in terms of voting. There isn't this, you know, I once had somebody say to me about, oh, well, if you're not elected, then you can't vote. That's not true. You know, everybody is equal once they are a trustee of the charity. So volunteers who may carry out a role for the committee, such as, let's use the example of a minute secretary or a bookkeeper, they can attend your meetings, but they are not allowed to vote or take part in any of the trustees' discussions. So you can invite people to attend your charity meetings, but they wouldn't be allowed to vote on any of the decisions that you're making. And you do need to be really, really clear with people about that. And this is why I've kind of said that having a terms of reference for a subgroup is important, and having roles and responsibilities set out for volunteers is important, so that people understand where their role begins and where it ends. I wouldn't expect volunteers to attend your trustee meetings. You might want to have a meeting with your volunteers to have a conversation with them about, you know, are they happy? You know, the charity is taking this direction, or, you know, can we involve you in this, that and the other? But the actual charity trustee meetings themselves, I would only expect charity trustees to attend those meetings and, you know, take part in the decisions. So I've listed on this slide the Charity Commission's view, and you can, there is the link here. When I email it out to you, obviously the link will be live, and you can click on the link and that takes you to the Charity Commission page for decision-making powers of your charity. And the list there is the remit that you must act within when you're a charity trustee. So just reflecting back on the point about trustees making decisions, it's really important that you keep clear minutes of your decisions, that you keep an accurate record, And if necessary, if you're discussing something that's listed here that is complex, high impact, has a significant financial impact to it, or is financially high risk, make sure you're recording that vote. And in some cases, if it's really contentious, what you might want to do is do a recorded vote where you name each individual and record whether they were in favour or against the decision. So, it is important that you make sure that as we all know, that your records are accurate and correct should you have to reflect back on them for any reason. Okay, now I don't know if this is going to work. I do hope it is. If you can bear with me for a few minutes with this, it's a case study from Neil Muirhead, who is the chairman of Gamlingay Eco Hub. Neil was in a position where he was down to 2 trustees at the beginning of lockdown, and during lockdown he managed to recruit himself a really nice, healthy, I think he's got 6 or 7 trustees now, a really healthy committee, and this film just explains how he did that.
I'm Neil Muirhead and I'm chairman of the trustees of the Gamlingay Community Centre. This is a community centre built originally in the 60s but transformed 10 years ago with a major extension and refurbishment, partly locally funded, partly grant funded and partly via a loan. The centre provides extensive space for community uses and activities within Gamlingay, together with accommodating the Gamlingay Library and Parish Council office. The building is known as the Eco Hub. It's one of the greenest buildings in Cambridgeshire. It's got solar energy, it's got ground source heat pumps, it's got photovoltaic panels. We even harvest our rainwater to flash our loos with. Low energy lighting, high levels of insulation. So it's a very green, eco-friendly building, and it is the hub of the village. So Eco Hub rather fits nicely. We've got a very broad range of community activities and classes and interest groups taking place within the centre, subject to COVID, of course. Normally speaking, that would be generating an annual letting income of something like £80,000 a year. I joined the trustees about 3 years ago, and there were 7 or 8 trustees who had been around for a long time. About the start of the COVID crisis and the lockdown, the chair lady, who was fairly recently appointed, resigned both as chair and as trustee because her husband had been taken ill and she needed to devote more time to looking after him. I was deputy chair and kind of by default stepped in. But by then, the old guard had vanished. Some had moved away, some had seen the writing on the wall, but I was left with a group of 3 people, and then one of them left, so I was now a trustee chair of a group of 2, which didn't give us a quorum, so that's quite a problem. At this point, I'm probably one of the few people that actually said, wow, COVID's a good thing, because COVID shut the Eco Hub down. The shutdown happened, we had to close it down, all activities stopped, all the staff were furloughed, we sort of switched off everything we possibly could to reduce our costs. So actually there wasn't too much for the trustees to do. But I still had the problem. I was one of 2 trustees. I had to get on with things and find new trustees as quickly as we could. So my challenge was a recruitment campaign and funds. Well, I drafted an advertisement seeking new trustees, which went out on social media and local magazines and publications. But what I decided to do was try and define the role a bit more than just come and become a trustee. I wanted trustees that would come and have a function. They would have a role to play. They could be a champion of something that was going on. Because if you give people something to do, they can get much more enthusiastic than just turning up for the monthly meeting. So we got those advertisements out, and lo and behold, networking. Networking is an interesting thing. You talk to people not because you think that they become a trustee, because they might know somebody who will become a trustee. So you've got to sell the role to your contact and then hope that that goes out. It worked. I got 2 come through from that route. So suddenly I've got 7 new trustees to bring on board. I invited them all to come and meet me at the Eco Hub. We all sort of followed the rules with masks and social distancing and all that sort of stuff. And I talked them through the history of the Eco Hub and how it had come about, what goes on there, the sort of activities, daily, weekly, monthly, periodic. Talk them through the responsibilities of becoming a trustee. Because actually the way we operate, we've got the Gambling Gate Community Centre Limited, which is a limited company, but that is a charitable trust. So by becoming a trustee, you also become a director of a company. So there are some sort of, potentially onerous responsibilities there. So it's important that these people understood what that was about. Also talking through the relationship we've got with the parish council, who actually own the building, but they lease it to GCC. We've got a finance agreement in place, which is a bit of a buffer against potential financial problems. So that's quite a nice story to tell. I then took each candidate on a bit of a tour of the building, but it is an interesting building to have a look round. And most of them knew about it, but hadn't been and had a look round. Talked to them about, I wanted trustees to come in and meet our customers and meet their customers and meet our staff and support the staff and get involved. I was also teasing out of them what skills they've got, which I thought we could use to the sort of champion role. And I was lucky in that respect. I had a really good crowd. I'd already decided to give them a role, a champion's role, if you like. And as I then went back to them, all of them they would like to become trustees. Off we went. I provided them with a pack with all the forms they needed to read and understand and all the things they needed to fill in. But let me give you some examples of those champion roles. A lady who works in a local nursery in the village, and she's a volunteer at one of our youth clubs that's held at the youth club. She's attended lots of courses and extensive knowledge in safeguarding both children and adults. Quite an important thing these days. I asked her to be the champion trustee for overview safeguarding. She's since written a new safeguarding policy. She's involved with Lisa Acre, which is our new policy on safeguarding. Another lady, physically disabled. I asked her to be the champion trustee with an overview of disability and inclusion. One that we hadn't got a very good policy on, and it was a bit weak. These days, inclusion is very far-reaching. She's really taken on with that. We're providing her with some generic stuff, some of it from ACRE, that she can work with and supporting her, but she's got her teeth into that one. I had a guy with a career in business consultancy, but he loved all things legal. And he's got a diploma in the law. He's become my champion of law. He's helping us write those policy documents. He's helping us with terms and conditions. And he's been really helpful in trying to interpret the law which sits in behind the COVID roadmap, which is all been a bit vague. Boris says we can do this, but what does the actual law say behind that? So there's another great role. Another gentleman, long career in business development. He happens to be the chair of the Gambling Gate local magazine, the Gazette, and he's a parish councillor, so good guy to have. I asked him to become the sort of champion of business management, business development and sales. Sarah, one of our managers, takes responsibility for most. But this guy, Larry, has really brought some good thinking into her plans. And we've got a great programme of stuff lined up for September to launch the Eco Hub post-COVID. Another guy, career as a technical engineer with Airbus, loves to fix things. So he's become my champion of running repairs. He's in there replacing door locks and tap washers and so on, which is saving us money, but he loves it. The real interest, all 8 trustees, and including me, have got our champions role. The great thing is when we have a trustees meeting, the biggest item on the agenda is these people that all come and tell us what they've been doing in their patch. And that really creates a debate, interaction, and you know, gets things going. So by getting trustees involved in a function, something they can own, something theirs, and contribute to, makes a huge difference than just turning up for a monthly meeting and plodding through an agenda. So yeah, I think we work quite well.
Mm.
Okay, I hope you found that useful as an example of how one committee, it won't work for everybody, but it was how one committee took it from the point of having 2 trustees and being the absolute legal minimum for a charity, to then turning it round and having an active committee of new and engaged trustees. And I thought it was a really good example to kind of share with you today. Okay, so I don't know if anybody's got any questions, or if they want to share with each other in terms of things that they've come across that, you know, has worked for you, and if we share it, it might just work for somebody else. Yeah, Kevin.
It's actually not so much on that. It's actually what happens if, for example, you've got trustees who aren't performing, or basically say they're going to do things and don't, so non-performance, if you like. And it's similarly, you know, if you're getting volunteers who aren't quite appropriate, how do you suggest sort of almost turning them down nicely? And so I suppose it's looking at it from a negative perspective, but what happens if, you know, for whatever reason it's not quite working out?
Okay, so in terms of the volunteers, that's why I would suggest that you have a volunteering policy in place. So you've actually got a protocol that you can go back to in terms of how you would manage that process. Ultimately, I would suggest that trustees, when you're taking on new volunteers, is that you have an application form. It does feel a bit heavy, but if you've got an application form, and then you could have maybe 2 or 3 trustees who are able to, if you like, induct those volunteers, have that conversation with them before they actually formally become volunteers of your organisation. So you've got some process that you follow in setting up volunteers before they become active for your charity. So you've got, you know, an opportunity to say to them whether they, you know, whether you think they have the right skills, or, you know, whatever you're looking for in that individual. It's really important, as I said to you, about having that complaints process in place, so that you know how you're going to address something if it goes wrong. So the volunteering policy for me is a really important element, and we can help you and support you with setting up that volunteering policy and a complaints process for volunteers if you need to do that. It very much will depend on the scale of your organisation and, you know, the amount of volunteers that you've got. If you've got 1 or 2 volunteers, then if that volunteer isn't working out and fitting in with you, then it's a case of the chairman having that conversation and saying, you know, thank you very much, but you know, I don't think we need your help and support any longer, in a nice way. So, you know, think about the scale of it and put in place what you feel is appropriate. But I would recommend a policy, a volunteering policy. Malcolm, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on that point, my advice would be very careful about who you take on as a trustee.
Definitely.
Probably is better to have someone come on as a volunteer in the first instance to see what they're like before they're invited to be a trustee. We had a trustee in the early days who nearly cost me my whole committee. He was such a nightmare. He was one of these guys who wanted every I dotted and every T crossed. And I suddenly realized that I couldn't dispense with his services except in very exceptional circumstances. So I actually had to work on securing his resignation.
Malcolm, the only point that I'd pick up on there is the fact that many trustees are not invited to join the committee. If you're elected, you stand for election and you get elected to the committee. If you're a representative member, you're nominated by an organisation to sit on the committee. The trustees cannot refuse anybody. So, you know, if they've stood for election, got elected to the committee, or if they've been nominated by an organisation that has the power to nominate through your governing document, you can't refuse an individual. So it is very much about having that induction process in place and having procedures in place where the chairman can maybe take someone to one side and say to them, you know, basically mediating if there's a situation that arises, and to try and resolve any conflicts that might come through the committee. It is a challenge at times, and you know, I've been in a similar position with Malcolm where I've had people who have, you know, almost done their damnedest to blow the committee up, and it is very uncomfortable for everybody involved. But you can't, it's not based purely on inviting people to join. You do have to bear that in mind. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments or anything that anybody would like to share? No?
I think the last point, Lisa, is it's all right saying that somebody can be, you know, you can't turn them down if they're elected or a representative of one of the user groups. It's difficult with the elected, but with user groups, should that group be aware of what the requirements are before they propose somebody to come into that role?
Absolutely. So when you're writing to if your governing document has representative members included in it, I would recommend that when you write to the organisation asking them to appoint, you could say to them well ahead, and this is why many governing documents say to write a month ahead of the AGM. I prefer to say 2 months, because if you've got a parish council on there, you've got to work in with their meeting cycle, and not every parish council meets on a monthly basis, but you do need to provide them with some information about what the role and responsibility is. Going back to the point in the slides where it's really important to make people aware of what that is. So there is a template that we can provide which gives you a basic kind of, this is what your roles and responsibilities as a trustee would be, which is 1 sheet of paper, which might be just enough for you to provide to the nominating group in order for them to pass on to anybody who would be interested. Or I would suggest to the nominating group that the person that they're going to put in touch with you has a conversation with the chairman ahead of that appointment. So that they can fully understand what they're undertaking. And a representative member or an organisation that has the power to nominate somebody, it doesn't have to be a member of that organisation. So let me use the example of a parish council. So if a parish council, through the governing document, has the power to nominate a trustee, it doesn't have to be one of the parish councillors. It could be somebody they know in the community. So they could, you know, the clerk will write back to you and say, well, we nominate Mr. Smith, who lives in the village, and we think he would make a very good trustee of the charity. So I think the point that you're making there, Stan, is really important, and it's about making sure that person understands the role they would be undertaking if they are nominated to that post. So having that conversation with the nominating organisation before is really, really important.
Yeah, I think also with elected trustees, because it may well be that somebody's name is put forward and the rest of the committee are aware of this person and thinks they may be disruptive to the group. So you don't want to be bringing in people that are going to upset the apple cart, as it were.
No, you don't. And I think that's the that can be the dilemma quite often when you hold your AGM, and if you think there are people who potentially want to stand as trustees but could be damaging to the charity or disruptive to the charity, thinking through the process of how you manage your AGM, and you might want to do it so that you can have names nominated in advance That's one way of doing it, rather than just taking nominations from the floor. So the committee really do need to talk about how the function of the AGM should take place, and not just stick the notice up, wait for the meeting, and and hope for the best, because the secretary would need to plan for potentially ballots, potentially plan for maybe a disruptive meeting, whatever. Depends what's happening in your community at the time, and you'll get a steer of that, and you'll get a steer of what the feeling of the village is. But if there have been some unpopular decisions, planning your AGM is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? No, don't mind taking part for me. I'll launch the poll now. And then if you can vote for me, that would be fantastic. Okay, has everybody voted? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There should be 11. Oh, 11, everybody's voted. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll end the poll and share it with you. So it looks like, I think that indicates that people have taken something away of value today. I do hope so. If there are any if you've got local situations, or you want clarification, or I know in the example Linton's here today, I can remember when the whole committee wanted to retire, and they were in an absolute panic, and I came out to a public meeting and we managed to recruit some volunteers to take over. And I remember getting an email, a very grateful email from the retiring committee members saying, thank you, we can now walk away. And they'd all been in post for about 20 years or something. So yeah.
Yeah, there was very little in the way of publicity or succession planning with that whole committee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be a problem. And that's why I'm suggesting to you that, not necessarily, I had it on every single agenda for my committee, but, at least put it on once or twice a year and have that discussion as a committee about, where's the fresh blood coming from? What are we going to do in terms of people shadowing each other? Because, if our chairman is taken down with an illness, or the treasurer has to give up for unforeseen circumstances, you're going to be in a pickle. What are you going to do? So having a plan is kind of good. Anyway, I'll leave it there with you all. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. And I will email you all later on this afternoon. I'll send you a link to the recording, and if you've got any questions, just give me a shout.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.